daycare center. The children are being eaten alive by mosquitoes. Come and do something about it. Some of you may have heard this story. It's absolutely true. So I put on my nice white summer uniform, the one in which you look like you should be selling ice cream instead of saving lives. And I went up there and went to the daycare center, and they had built a ramp of tires and lashed them down so the kids would climb up and down all day long and tire their little asses out, so when their parents picked them up, they were ready to go home and go to sleep. Well, guess what was in those tires? And guess what was breeding in that water? It was the Asian tiger mosquito, which bites the living crap out of you. And there was a lot of debris in there, which provides the food for the larvae. So I said proudly, with many people staring, we're going to use integrated mosquito management to fix this problem. And we're not going to use pesticides. And they all went, oh, thank God he's going to say this. We're not going to use pesticides. We're going to save the children. And I said, here's what you need to do. First, you need to clean all that debris out of those tires. And then you need to get the water out of there. And the last thing I want you to do to prevent the problem from coming back, you're only filling my left side, right? We
of course.
About this. Okay. Is I want you to drill holes in the tires. And they said, oh, thank you, Lieutenant. Thank you very much. So I got back to Florida very proud of myself, like I always am. And about 3 weeks later, my phone rings. Lieutenant, this is the public works officer who outranked me. That didn't work. We've got mosquitoes. So I went back up there. They had drilled the holes in the top of the tires. I kid you not. So who's been to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier? Anybody? It's awesome, isn't it? It's a life-changing experience. Yesterday was the 100th anniversary of the tomb, in case you did not know that. You see here one of the tomb guards on the left. They walk across that mat and they take 21 steps. And then they stop for 21 seconds. They turn and face the tomb, re-shoulder their weapon, and they wait 21 seconds. And then they walk back across the mat 21 steps and get to the other end, and they repeat that process. Why are all those 21s in there? 21 gun salute. You're exactly right. The highest honor in the military. In the right there, you're looking at a female Anopheles mosquito having a blood meal. Who can tell me why you know that's an Anopheles mosquito and not a Culex or an Aedes mosquito? Because if you're trained to see what others overlook, you would know. See what I did there, Bobby? The female Anopheles mosquito has a very unusual habit of sticking her butt in the air at about a 45-degree angle when she bites. So the next time you're at a barbecue and a mosquito lands on you and bites, and that butt goes way up in the air, you can say, did you know that's an Anopheles mosquito biting me? I can tell because its butt's in the air. That mosquito has been responsible for more deaths than practically anything on this planet, and we're going to talk a little bit about that because of malaria. Now, I've got an axe to grind. Do we have anybody in here who's one of these? Did any of you grow up in a military family? Yeah? There's a term out there that I despise. It's military brat. I'm not from a military family, but my kids are. And when I would hear people say, well, I'm a military brat, I thought, are you really a child, especially an annoying, spoiled, or impolite child? Not everybody can be like that. And this has really been bothering me. So I want all of you today to leave with this knowledge. Like Bobby said, you're going to walk out of here with things that you didn't know before you came in. BRAT's actually an acronym. Did you know that? British Regiment Attached Traveler. A military brat was a person who was allowed to travel overseas with the service member. It's not a little snot-nosed kid who wants everything their way. It's that little kid there. So now you know what a military brat is. Isn't that awesome? It's pretty awesome, isn't it? It is. Thank you. Here's what's happening today, in case you didn't know it. This is what's happening today. You got them, we got you, and if I had a third one, I would have put all the vendors and exhibitors on there, but we're all in this together. And so, talk about a revolution. That's what's happening. All of this knowledge is going into your brain whether you like it or not. This little chart, we at Catchmaster are fortunate enough, and by the way, my boss just showed up, so I'm going to have to not quite misbehave as much as I normally do, what some of you are used to, but he's here. We at Catchmaster are fortunate enough to have our own in-house graphic team, and they're awesome. A lot of big companies contract that stuff out, and then they get back, garbage in, garbage out sometimes. Not us. This is an example of one of the things they made for me, based on statistics from the World Health Organization. And what it is it's representing approximately the number of people who die every year on this planet from these various things. And those of you who are close to the front and close to the back can probably read it, but it starts over here on the right with sharks and wolves kill approximately 10 people a year. About 10. And that's a bad thing, right? I mean, 10 people. But you hear things like this. And finally tonight on the nightly news, a shark attack occurred off the coast of Australia. Well, if I'm sitting in Chicago, that doesn't really matter too much to me. But it makes the news, right? You've seen this, CNN or whatever those things are. And then we work our way across here, elephants, hippopotamus, 500. And then we get into some of these arthropod-related things. Kissing bugs transmit a disease called Chagas disease, which is becoming more and more of a problem in the US, by the way. You heard it here today. Tsetse flies transmit what in Africa? Something that I hope none of you has today during these talks. Sleeping sickness. You can't answer these questions, Luke. Come on. Man, you're supposed to know this stuff. If you want me to ask you a really hard one, I'll ask you a really hard one. But my point is, snakes kill about 50,000 people a year. My point is, over here, we still lose between 750,000 and 1 million people on this planet every year from mosquito bites. And it's been that way throughout history. And that's part of what we're going to explore today, is the impact that vector-borne disease has had, literally some of it being world-changing. So there's going to be a little bit of overlap between a couple of things Bobby said and myself, but I'll present it a little bit different way. Where did public health and pest control come from? They have a very rich history, sort of evolved together. In the old days before we had doctors, anything having to do with health, hygiene, a person being sick, was generally given to a religious leader. Take care of this. And then they would either make a potion or do a chant or burn some incense or something, hoping to ward off that evil dumbass that was making people sick. We didn't know about bacteria and viruses then. And this went on for thousands of years. And then along came the Romans, about 500 BC, more or less. And for the next 1,000 years or so, they made tremendous strides particularly in purifying water and cleaning up sewage. Any of you ever seen some of the Roman ruins? Unbelievable, these aqueducts that they built that were miles and miles and miles long to bring in fresh water. They cleaned up their swamps and suddenly malaria went away. They didn't know why. They just knew that with sanitation some of these diseases went away. Well, then about 496 AD, I believe it was, which was the end of the Roman Republic and Roman Empire, we plunged into what many of you know as the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages. This was a time when health was basically disregarded. Diseases raged. As you can see there, there's a plaque that says something about through this portal, the Black Death entered, blah, 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 blah. Roughly a third of the population of Europe died from the Black Death during the Dark Ages. Roughly a third. And then what came next? Who knows what that great period was that came? It's called the period of enlightenment. It begins with an R. 10 points for Gryffindor. Did you get that one? Harry? Close. Boy, this is a tough audience. I tell you, I don't get no respect. The Renaissance. This was when people like Galileo, Michelangelo, Copernicus, Descartes. He put Descartes before the horse. That's a new one. I just made that up. That's a terrible joke. I've got more lines in graph paper. And a guy named Leonardo da Vinci. He painted a little thing called the Mona Lisa, didn't he? But you know what else he got interested in? Medicine and the human body. He did lots and lots of drawings of the human body, and he even cut some of them open and looked at them. And people started saying, you know, maybe some of this stuff inside of us has an actual function, and maybe it sort of works together. And maybe when a person gets sick, maybe some of this stuff isn't working so well, and it's not just that their body fluids are imbalanced. There might be reasons. And then, this is kind of what started all of this thing about vector-borne diseases, the germ theory. In the late 1800s, two men are credited for coming up with this. A lot of other people were thinking about it, but I only have time to mention two. You're going to know one of them for sure. This guy. Who's that? Louis. Louis. We're going to sing another song later, but I thought I'd... Louis Pasteur was a French chemist. You've all heard of him. You all probably have pasteurized milk. Yes. He figured out that there wasn't a thing called spontaneous generation, but it was fermentation. And he used his knowledge of fermentation to save the entire silkworm industry in France. But more importantly, he saved the beer industry and the wine industry. Amen. He's one of my heroes. He also discovered how to make vaccines. And he made some of the first vaccines. One was for rabies, which he gave to a young boy named Joseph Meister, who had been bitten 54 times by a rabid dog, and he saved his life. He created a vaccine for a disease called anthrax and others. So he's one. Does anybody know this guy? This is Bobby Corrigan when he was a graduate student. Sorry, Bobby. No, I'm not really. I'm not sorry. This is a guy named Robert Koch, K-O-C-H. He was a German physician, and he discovered the bacterium that causes tuberculosis, and he came up with something that we still use today. It's still part of the revolution in infectious diseases, and it's a very simple thing called Koch's Postulates. And it's 4 simple steps. If you want to prove that something causes a disease, first you find it in the sick person or the sick animal. Then you isolate it in the laboratory, growing it in culture, or maybe in animals. And then you re-inoculate it, and then it causes the same condition. Those are the 4 simple steps. And that was about 1880. And we're going to come back to that. That's a nice picture of some Streptococcus bacteria there, the red. And I just want to caution you, we still have a lot of these things lurking around. We still have plague in the United States. Did you know that? People say, oh, plague, that's an old disease. It's gone, right? Nope. We have cases of plague in the United States every year, whether it's flea-borne, transmitted by fleas, or there's another form of the plague called pneumonic plague that's transmitted directly from a person to a person, or sometimes from an animal to a person, like a veterinarian handling a sick cat can get plague. It's really hard to film me when I keep walking, isn't it?
It's all right.
Just get one shot. I am now speaking and giving my talk at the New York Pest Expo. Good, that's enough. That little suit you see there is what the medical attendees used to wear because nobody knew what caused plague and they thought that this would protect them. And it's primarily a disease that we find out west. There was one laboratory case there in Illinois, that red dot, but we have 6, 8, 10, 20 cases of plague every year. And again, it gets in the news and people go, oh, there's plague. Every year in the western part of the United States, and some of you probably occasionally go out there, maybe to go camping or to go to Disneyland or whatever you do, every year there are campgrounds, national parks, and other things that are closed because they find plague. Usually it's a die-off from ground squirrels, which people think are such cute, prairie dogs. Can also be ground squirrels. Prairie dogs. In my previous job, we got a call from Colorado, and there was a 3-acre prairie dog colony like this, right next to a distribution center for one of our major companies that you would all recognize the name of it. And what they were going to do was they were going to fumigate all those animal burrows. That was the first thing they were going to do. What happens when you do that? What do the fleas do? I gotta go find something to eat. So they leave those dead prairie dogs and they start hopping around like mad and they start biting people and giving them the plague. So you don't kill the animals first. So just a little bit about pest control here. I have a whole talk actually on these two subjects, but not time for that today. We've already heard that organized pest control started in the Middle Ages and it revolved around rats. That is indisputable evidence, Your Honor. Bobby talked about the Pied Piper. We know why he's the piper, right? Because he played a pipe. Do you know why he's called Pied? I didn't know this. Do you know why Pied, P-I-E-D? Oh, wait. Say that again.
It was what they described their clothing, that patchwork clothing that they would wear.
That's it. I thought maybe he had gotten hammered the night before and he was like pie-eyed or something. But it's that clothing, and that's why the Pied Piper is always sort of depicted like this. This is an amazing legend, by the way. If you want to read a lot of different variations of this, get out your Google machine sometime and just read about the Pied Piper. There's some evidence that maybe some of it is truthful, but who knows? And then rat catchers started to specialize. And look at what they specialized in: traps, chemicals, and dogs. Wow, way back then. This is one of my favorites. The oldest known pest control company is this company called H. Tiffin & Son Limited in London, 1690. They only would handle 100 customers. And when they had an opening, they advertised in the newspaper, H. Tiffin & Sons has an opening for a new pest control customer. Make your bid. That's literally what it was. It was make your bid. And their tagline for their company was, Pest Destroyers to Her Majesty and the Royal Family. How'd you like to drive around New York City with that on your truck? And here's our buddy Jack Black again. This is a little bit different picture. I doubt if most of you go out and do your rat work in a 3-piece tuxedo and a top hat like that, but that's how Jack Black has been depicted. He's very famous. He was a real person, and his title was, I couldn't remember this one, Rat and Mole Destroyer to Her Majesty Queen of the United Kingdom. I bet if they had business cards back then, if you could have one of those, boy, that'd be worth a hell of a lot of money. So these two things sort of evolved about the same time. And then starting in about 1840, a lot of Europeans came to this country, came to this continent. And they brought with them their professions. And that was the start of our industry here, was the migration of these folks from Europe with their chemicals and probably their dogs and probably their cool titles. Who is that? Napoleon Bonaparte, the emperor, the Frenchman. In the early 1800s, he was directly involved in two world-changing events. World-changing, having to do with vector-borne diseases. He owned Haiti at the time, and if you don't know where Haiti is, I have a little map here. And I don't have my pointer anymore. Haiti's right there in green. This is the Caribbean, South America. Here's Florida. It's part of the island of Hispaniola. And starting in 1791, some of the locals there decided, we sort of don't like this French cloak hanging around us, so we're going to revolt. And the revolt went on into the early 1800s. And in 1802, Napoleon said, hey, we got to do something about this because my intent is to build a French empire over there and compete with those bad Spanish people. And there they are revolting. There's a comma there. You see how important grammar is? If I had said there they are revolting, that would mean that those people are actually revolting, but they are, never mind. This isn't a course in grammar, is it? So Napoleon called in his brother-in-law, General Leclerc, and he said, I want you to go over there, and I want you to take 20,000 of our best troops with you, and kick these guys in the ass and stop this thing so I can build my empire over there. So General Leclerc sailed over there, and there were a series of battles, and the French basically got control of Haiti. And then a little something called yellow fever showed up. Yellow fever transmitted by Aedes aegypti, cleverly known as the yellow fever mosquito. We people who study mosquitoes are so smart the way they name these things. There's still 30 to 50,000 deaths from yellow fever in the world every year, so it's still around. Well, yellow fever not only killed Napoleon's brother-in-law, it absolutely decimated those 20,000 troops. And so Napoleon said, "Sacre bleu!" Or maybe he didn't say that, but that's the only French I know. French fries. That was good, thank you. And so he sent 20,000 more troops over. And within weeks, all but 3,000 of those troops were dead. So Napoleon said in French, that's enough of this BS. And what did he do? He texted his good friend Thomas Jefferson. All right, a few of you are listening. I said he texted Thomas Jefferson. Not too bad. And he said, Tom, you know, I've been thinking about that, and we're happy to sell you that little parcel of land over there that became the Louisiana Purchase. Tom said, okay. So we got 800 and whatever that says, 27,000 square miles. Does anybody in the room know what it cost? It was more than what was paid, the beads that were paid for Manhattan. Wasn't it beads for Manhattan? Bobby, was Manhattan bought with beads?
$24.
$24, good enough. Well, this one was 15 million, and it included all or part of 15 states. And you can see them there in the green. It doubled the entire size of the United States. The French influence went away, and then after a few more events, the Spanish that were out here and the Spanish in Florida went away, and it became our current lower 48 United States. And yellow fever played a prominent role in that because Napoleon realized he could no longer defend the western part of the world because he was getting ready to do battles back in his homeland. So that's the first one. And in case you don't know, yellow fever is one of my favorite topics, so we have another little, we continued to have yellow fever outbreaks in the United States until 1905, but we don't have it here anymore. Well then, in 1812, Napoleon had pretty much conquered all of Europe, and you know, he's probably sitting around one day and he said, "Sacre bleu, I need something else to do." That's French poetry. So he said, hey, let's invade Russia. Okay, yes, Mr. Emperor, well, let's go invade Russia. So he lined up 600,000 troops known as the Grande Armée. I don't speak French, so it's probably something other than that. And on June 24th, 1812, after a grand review in Poland, they crossed the Niemen River and they invaded Russia. Any of you know this story? That's too bad, because I've forgotten it, so I can't tell the rest of it. The army was woefully unprepared for the weather, food. They thought they were going to live off the land, but the Russians kind of fooled them on that one. And they didn't bring supplies. They thought they'd just pick up things, I guess, along the way at Walmart and Home Depot and things like that. That was a really fake laugh. Thanks, Jeff. I love you, man. You know that. Ready to sing in a minute? Because it's coming. What the Russians did was they said, they're coming this way. Let's don't go fight them. Let's just keep pulling back. And the further they come into the country, the more goofed up they're going to get. And that's exactly what happened. They arrived in Moscow on September 14th. Remember, they started out with 600,000 troops. And by the time it was all over, Napoleon returned to France with only 30,000 troops. And only 10,000 of those were actually still functional. 220,000, and these are obviously estimates, of Napoleon's Grand Army died from louse-borne typhus, which was that bug you saw on the first screen that Andy said, "I don't want to see any lice in my tongue." It's not here. And dysentery. So they were being chewed on by these little teeny organisms, and at the same time they were shitting their brains out. And they were supposed to be fighting, and they didn't have any food and protective clothing. No wonder things went bad. Napoleon did not lose to the Russians. He lost to Generals Famine, Frost, and Typhus. Those were the three generals that defeated him. So he was exiled to Elba. Stand up, Heather. For which he returned eventually. Come on out here. This is your big moment. But then, as you all know, he lost at the Battle of what? Which ended his career? Waterloo. And it made 4 people really happy because they wrote a song about it that made him famous.
Waterloo,
How do you feel you won the war? Waterloo.
Waterloo.
You're fired. She'll never work for PNP again.
I won't quit my day job.
If you like ABBA, by the way, they decided they didn't have enough money and they've just gotten together and put out more music. They are my favorite palindrome. Does anybody know what a palindrome is? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't order that. This is considered one of the greatest statistical charts of all time, and it depicts what I just explained to you. Over here, on the left-hand side, the light brown, for those of you back there, this is Napoleon starting out in Poland. And then the march to Moscow and the shrinking number of men. You know, something happened right here. A few guys here said, you know, screw this, we're not going in there, we're going back home. And they went down this way. And then they got to Moscow here, and then this is the retreat. And you can see just what the little teeny bit that was left over by the end of getting back there. So